Meantime, I want to get to another CEO that we've been following, Stewart Butterfield, the CEO and co-founder of Slack. Stewart joins us now from his home, where he is also sheltering in place. Stewart, you sent out a massive tweet storm a couple of days ago and gave us a window into what a wild ride this has been for you as a CEO, for Slack as a company. You know, nobody knows what's going to happen next, but we've seen the markets go up and down leading up to this, and I'm sure that you must have some sort of operating assumption of what the macroeconomic picture looks like from here. What are you operating on?
Well, you might be optimistic. And first of all, let me say it's great to be back. It's been a long time, and nice to be with you. I've been spending a lot of time with other CEOs in the software industry. No one knows what to think. It's not just the overall macroeconomic impact, but what do you do when your salespeople can't travel to meet customers? You don't have field marketing events. So figuring out like the long-term business impact can be really tough, and there's forces kind of on both sides. We've experienced an enormous surge in usage among existing customers, expansion there, brand new customers signing up, brand new teams being created, and the rate at which we're expanding right now is not sustainable. So that will revert to the mean. When I say not sustainable, I just mean we would have everyone in the world on in a couple of months if we kept going. But what is the long-term impact? That's really difficult to say. And I'll pause there because I think this is an interesting conversation.
Now, you've founded so many different companies. You've gone through various economic cycles. We've just had this $2 trillion stimulus package signed into law. Is that going to be enough to lift the tech and the startup ecosystem?
That's a tougher one to know because it's not going to be evenly distributed. I can definitely see there's a handful of companies that are seeing an increase in their business as a result of what's going on. I think there's a fair number that are neutral. There's a couple that are just companies where they thought they had 18 months worth of cash on hand, and it turns out when your revenue goes to zero or gets cut by 95%. You actually have 45 days of cash on hand, and layoffs become inevitable. So there's going to be a lot of companies that struggle. I'm not sure, maybe brand new startups will always be, of course, more responsive to the environment and might have more flexibility. But there's going to be some really negative economic consequences. There's going to be a lot of bankruptcies. And it's really difficult to predict, I think, at this point, at how we bounce back, in what way we bounce back. One thing that's clear right now, though, I think we're oversimplifying when we characterize what's going on as just working from home, because we've had employees who work from home for a long time. They have a desk set up, and they have a comfortable chair, and they have an internet connection, and they have childcare. That's not what's happening now. I mean, right now you have spouses arguing over who gets the kitchen table for the next video call, and you have a 3-year-old running around, and the in-laws can't help with the kid, and there is no babysitters, and you can't get your hair cut or go out for a coffee. So there's a very different environment, and one I think where there's an enormous amount of uncertainty. And one thing I think we all know is that human beings hate uncertainty.
So let's talk about human beings, because in this tweet storm, you got really personal towards the end. You talked about the adrenaline that you ran on for the first 2 weeks of everyone working from home. Now that's starting to wear off. It still feels great to be able to help, but you're locked inside. Yeah. You're locked inside. People are more scared. Why did you decide to get so personal?
Well, I think, it's important, and I hope that the way that we've been handling this, and I know that a lot of other companies have been handling it, which is, for lack of a better term, kind of charitable towards employees, is the only way that companies are going to survive. If you have a culture where line managers are constantly supervising and checking in with people and ensuring that they're working, and demanding a certain number of hours in a world where a single parent who has a 3-year-old in the house just can't possibly cope with that, you're not going to have good results. And I think in one sense, I look at the way that we operate today and I think, man, this is like everything I ever wanted to accomplish as a CEO over the last 5 years, but was never able to do. And by that, I mean, there is none of this behavior, which exists in every company of, Emily, that's an interesting idea. We should really check into it. Maybe we'll do some user research. We can build a little model. Why don't we circle back in 3 weeks and see what we want to do? That doesn't happen. People just go, and it's action. So in that sense, it's great. And I think to get to the point where employees aren't feeling like work is a source of stress, like they're going to be negatively evaluated because they can only put in 3 hours on a given day, is well, it's not going to serve anyone. And I think getting to the point where there's a really high degree of coordination, of alignment, and where decisions are being made quickly can more than compensate for the lack of hours. Ultimately,
Right.
people have to stay
Now,
healthy.
you tweeted that you added You tweeted that you added 9,000 new users just halfway through Q1, which is almost twice as many as you've added in the quarters before. That said, you're going to see belts tightening, budgets are being cut, layoffs are happening. How long do you consider that kind of growth, or do you expect that kind of growth to keep up? And do you expect it to taper off or decline as the crisis continues to expand and eventually people start returning to work?
So the current expectation is that that number will level off. And to be clear, that's 9,000 new paid companies, and they vary in size, and they're all around the world. Some of them have a dozen employees, and some of them have thousands. But I think that will inevitably have at least a partial reversion to the mean. I do think that there's kind of a permanent step up in the rate of new teams adopting Slack that we can expect. On the other hand, again, it's very difficult for us to model or even think about how to model the economic impact we will see 3 or 6 months down the road as the kind of the short-term impact. Because I saw people laid off from hotel jobs 2 weeks ago. The short-term impact of that is kind of clear. The longer-term impact of how that cascades to the rest of the economy, to insurance payments not being made, landlords not receiving rent, the supplier networks kind of crumbling, and how you come back from that. You can't just turn the lights back on and everyone's back in the same job. That part, again, I'm not going to pretend I have a supercomputer up here that can predict what's going to happen.
Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, is calling on CEOs to take a 90-day no layoffs pledge. Is that something you would take?
Sure. I mean, we're also hiring, but I think like Salesforce, we're a software company, so we're not going to be affected by this. And I think that it can be received as a little presumptuous for someone who's running a company who just had 90% hit to revenue. So if you're in the travel business, hospitality, obviously if you're a restaurant, you can't really pledge not to lay people off. But
President
again,
Trump is talking about people returning to work, Stewart, as soon as Easter, and yet you've got all these health experts disagreeing with him. What's your take on the president's response and how he's handled this outbreak so far? And would you feel comfortable sending your teams back to work in the United States in 2 weeks?
No, we have 15 offices in 10 countries around the world. They are all currently either completely shut or open only for people to come in and grab things. We have no expectation that we're going to be back in the middle of April. I think the consensus among other CEOs I'm talking to is the absolute minimum is another 8 weeks, but I think most people are planning for 3, 4, 5, or even in 6 months.
So then do you think the president is misguided in this recommendation?
I think he's maybe willfully optimistic and hoping that there isn't enough of an economic impact to derail re-election chances.
Now, speaking of workflow, you've announced that Slack will now be able to integrate with Microsoft Teams. This is like your biggest competitor, and that people communicating on Slack will be able to communicate on those using Microsoft products. What's the interoperability there? And do you have Microsoft's buy-in for this? Are they doing this as well?
So we have a large number of enterprise customers, all different kinds, all around the world, companies like KPMG, Nationwide, the Veterans Affairs Department, which is an important one for us right now, because you can imagine they run the biggest integrated healthcare system in the United States. A lot of them are also Microsoft customers. In fact, the overwhelming majority of our enterprise customers use of our enterprise customers use Microsoft products. And we've worked on integrations with SharePoint, with OneDrive, with Outlook Mail and calendar services. And we see Teams as just another step there because those tools are used alongside Slack in a large number of places. I should say it's also, we're committed to an open ecosystem. So we also integrate with Cisco WebEx. We integrate with Zoom. And for us, this is the integration with Teams calling is important for customers who get their daily work done in Slack, but conduct meetings in Teams.
So, speaking about the wreckage that we will see from this, SoftBank, of course, as we understand, has been feeling the pain. SoftBank, a huge investor, they're going to be doing a big asset sale as a result of just the tumult that they are going through economically. Do you think that they'll sell Slack shares as a result of that, as one of the few bright spots in SoftBank's portfolio?
I cannot speculate. I think that they were an early believer in what we're trying to accomplish. I feel like we're in the very, very first stages. We're single-digit percentage penetrated into what's an enormous market. I want to do this for the next 25 years. Whether they sell now or hold, I think there's a growing number of shareholders who are really buying into the vision and becoming long-term supporters.
Now, I know that your team is doing a good job prepping you on off-the-wall and weird questions as this outbreak continues, because you mentioned that in your tweet storm. Yep. Your partner, Jen Rubio, who's the co-founder of Away, tweeted in response to all of your tweets that your night job is actually poop patrol. So given that, I'm here in my home studio working from home, totally terrified that one of my children is going to run into this broadcast and interrupt us. You're at home, running a public company from home. I'm curious how that has changed your job, and if there are any best practices, if you will, that you could share with us.
Yeah, one best practice, and this it might be a little different for you given your job, is we're encouraging people not to be terrified if their kids come in the room. We had a great moment. Normally, our all hands are kind of, they're an hour long, and people make slides, and there's a lot of rehearsal, and it's a big production. And the first all hands we had after everyone was working from home was completely different. We didn't have the AV and the cameras and the stage and the lights and everything. We all did it from our home. At that point, I hadn't yet been able to get my hands on a 100-foot coax cable, so I had to do it from our laundry room, which is where the modem is, and it was 23 minutes long. It was, I think, 6 or 7 of us on the executive team speaking for 30 to 90 seconds each about what's the most important thing going on right now, expressing gratitude and appreciation for the teams who are really stepping up and doing a great job. And by far the best received all hands we've ever had. People loved it. It was authentic. We cut right to the point. It was quick and concise. But there was one moment where Julie Legal, who our CMO, was giving her update, and suddenly one daughter pops into her lap and another daughter shows up behind her and is kind of dancing behind the chair. She didn't skip a beat, and the reaction internally was really kind of heartwarming. People took screenshots of that and thanked her for kind of normalizing this, because it is very difficult, I think, for parents of young children to be able to cope with this. The lack of school, after school care, any kind of child care, nannies, whatever setup people had is no longer available, and it's a pretty serious challenge.